categories. You have the early Bronze Age from 300 or 3300 BC to 2000 BC, the Middle Bronze Age from 2000 BC to the 1550 BC, and then the Late Bronze Age, which is 1550 to 1200 BC. And then you have the Iron Age, 1200 BC to 586 BC, and that again also has different stages depending on how you're looking at biblical archaeology. Iron Age number 1 is 1200 to 1000. Iron Age 2 is 1000 to 586. You also have Iron Age 2A, 2B, and 2C, which all have different categories. And then you get into the historical periods of 586 to the present. And what we're going to be looking at is more of the biblical things and biblical examples. So we have the Babylonian and Persian period from 586 to 332, in which 332, Alexander the Great spread Hellenism and the Greek culture. And so from the Hellenistic period, you have 332 BC to 37 BC, when in the Israelite territory, Rome became more influential. And so you have the Roman period from 37 BC to 324 AD. You have, following that, the Byzantine period from 324 to 638. And believe it or not, you're pretty much going to see all of these cultures and all of these different archaeology things, because once you start digging in Israel, you're going to find something, because there's tons and tons of history underneath that sand. So how do archaeologists dig? They dig a 5x5 or a 10x10 little square, and they just keep on digging down until they find something. And if they need to, they actually start digging in what they call a trench or a step technician. So what you do is you dig your 10 here, then you dig your 10 here, and you go a little bit deeper. You dig your 10 here, you go a little bit deeper. You can keep on just digging throughout the mountain. And so in one of the pictures, and in this picture specifically, you can kind of see how they did that step archaeology, where they do square after square after square. And they found a lot of things with coins and pottery in this site. This is Megiddo. So my first part of my journey when I went to Israel was to visit the Sea of Galilee. We drove up to Magdala. You probably know Mary Magdalene. This is where she would be from. Picture that you see is where the people from the Jewish revolt would most likely would have hid, up in the mountain area. And on the second side, you can kind of see the more wealthy side of Magdala, with a rich priestly family living there. Next, there's another picture. It was a huge compound, a huge house on the one side of the street, and on the other side of the street you had more of the people who are working class people who actually worked out of their houses. You'll notice a lot in these pictures, you have homes that are not only homes, but they're also industrial complexes. So a person is basically working out of their house, and it's kind of both a business and a home that they're living in. You'll also notice a lot of pictures of what we call mikvah. It was a ritual purity for people in the Jewish faith. What they would do is they'd have living water running through their mikvah, so that water most likely has been continuously going from the stream, and the stream then goes underwater or underground, and then it comes out into these things, and it goes back out into the water as like a little bit of a pass-through. And what was it about was similar to what we consider with baptism, about ritual purity. What they would do is they would go in their mikvah and they would come back out ritually pure. It was a long journey to go to Jerusalem from Galilee, so a lot of mikvahs are found in this area. The wealthy priestly family also had money enough to buy what we call mosaics. They're little floor tiles that are depicted of different things. You'll notice if you have a mosaic that's Jewish, it will not have what we call idolatrous pictures. It will just be like shapes and things like that, where the further you go along, and depending on the Jewish family, if they ended up having different depictions of other things, it would be of animals or fruit, but never of humans. We see this on their coins. We see this on Jewish items like pottery, and kind of what you saw out in the little entranceway into the sanctuary. There was a little lamp that had just shapes on it. It didn't have any like depictions of humans, because the Jewish faith had a big concept of idolatry, not having anything having to do with humans. So here's what would be an example of the residential homes that also had businesses. You can kind of see what we would call a picture of, you'd have this top area, and then you'd have this bottom area, and the top area would go on top of the bottom area, and then it would grind the grain to make wheat and flour, wheat to flour. Another thing you see over here is a fish pond. They had fish ponds apparently in their homes where they wanted fresh fish. And if you wanted fresh fish, what's the best way to do it? Having like an aquarium in your house, right? But they would also probably sell these fish as they would go. There's other evidence of people making woven items out of sheep's wool and selling that from their homes, and other items that would have been like oil presses, pottery that they've made, other evidences of those. And then you get to Magdala's synagogue. Believe it or not, this was a synagogue that was built in the 1st century. Most likely was one of the synagogues that Jesus went around to and actually preached at. And so when you think about it, the synagogue is actually really well preserved, probably one of the best 1st century synagogues preserved today. You can kind of see on the one picture right here, the mosaic floor with the shapes, as well as what they would have used to put the scroll on and to read from it. On that, there was a picture of the 7 branched Torah or menorah that is in the temple. And so it was kind of a reminder every time you put the scroll on that thing to read from, that the people would remember that their focus is on the temple in Jerusalem and on God and how he is the light. We see Jesus visited and taught in reference to Matthew 4:23 and Mark chapter 1, verse 39. And my class was fortunate to also walk through a current archaeological site. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share this, but I'm going to share it. We were able to go to a site that was still a dig site, and I think it was the Franciscans were studying this, and it was actually the Magdala shipping area. On the one part of the city, you could see the moorings where they would tie their ships to, and they would most likely unload their haul of fish. And then inside the city, you actually had a gymnasium, and there were baths, so you could shower after you're done in your gymnasium activity of wrestling or whatever. It's possible that this was a Greek area, but it's also possible that it was Jewish. The Franciscan is still discovering new things as he digs and he learns new things. But when he showed me the picture of all of this, it was just a meadow that had this little thing sticking up. And they bought this plot of land, and they started digging, and they were still digging when I was there. But this is what they found after, I think he said, 17 years of digging. So you can imagine how long the process to dig up this is probably 100-foot by 200-foot plot of land, 17 years. Very, very, very cautious of when you're digging, what you find, you make a note of it. You keep digging, you make a note of what you find. And over time, this is what they've uncovered. Magdala is known as a fish tower, and so there were a tower, but there was also a possible mikvah. We weren't sure if this was a different bath, but the way that it was shaped looked like it could have been a mikvah, which makes us think it was more Jewish use than Greek use. Then I went over to Capernaum, the home base of Jesus. In this picture, you can kind of see, and similar to Magdala, there are residential homes that are right next to or are their industrial complex. You can kind of see in that picture right here, the grinding stone that would have grounded wheat and other things. And over here, this is upside down, but this would be what they would have for like an an olive press. So they'd put the olives and then they'd press it down and try to get all the juices out for different activities that they would use them for. What usually happened when space was limited is you would build on top of where you were. And that's exactly what the first century church or first century synagogue happened. You can kind of see in this part right here the basalt foundation of the original first century synagogue that Jesus most likely preached at. But in the 4th century, the Jewish people were not preoccupied with Jesus just like they are now. And so they built on top of their synagogue in the 4th century. And this is kind of what it looks like today. It's huge. There are, you ever see those plaques on pews, or you see the plaques on different items in the church? Well, they did this back then too. It would say, so-and-so built this wall, or so-and-so donated money to build this huge pillar, right? And gave this money to give this. They were all over different sites. So-and-so donated such and such. It's just interesting that things haven't really changed, right? I gave this, I want my name on it. And then again, the residential, I thought in my head, how small are these houses? But all they really used them for was sleeping, or if they had a bigger house, it was for having animals in, and that was more of like the bottom basement area, and then you had the top area, which was for your living arrangements. So Capernaum residential, and how they had industrial in 2 different areas. Kind of shows you a little bit more of that residential and industrial complex. Again, do you see how they're just kind of laying around these little grinding things, right? You just find them all over the place because wherever people lived, they were doing their business and their work outside of their house. Like it was really close. And then in Capernaum, again, I said it was Jesus's headquarters in his Galilee ministry. And so this right here would be Peter's house. We actually see in all 4 Gospels, Capernaum mentioned. It's where Jesus healed the mother-in-law of Peter. It's where he healed the paralytic through the roof. It's where he healed the centurion's son. It's where he raised Jairus' daughter. And it's where he healed the woman that had the bleeding issue. Peter, Andrew, most likely lived in this house, or had something with this house, as well as Matthew, the tax collector, would have all lived in Capernaum. You can kind of see from the church that's built over Peter's house that they most likely expanded Peter's house enough to be a house church. What I think might have only fit 12 people, they might have filled even more. I'm not sure, but that was the size of the house, was about 12 people, like sardines. And then from the Capernaum, you can kind of see where the apostles might have set out their boat to go different places, or maybe where Jesus called Peter and the other disciples as he walked along the Sea of Galilee. It was beautiful. It was warm. When we get to the next place, it was 104 Fahrenheit, so it was hot. When we get to the Hellenistic cities, there were 10 of them. They were built and formed by Greek Seleucid Empire, and later the Romans ended up continuing that culture. Hippos is one of these cities. We're also going to see Byzantine churches in this, because you build on top of other cultures is what you're going to see. So they had received the Hellenistic culture, upgrades, right? Who loves plumbing that goes out of the house and you don't have to go outside of the camp anymore, right? Plumbing, flushing systems, sewer systems. You also see how the Byzantine church in the 700s had an earthquake. Hey, earthquake. We were talking about that earlier. And all these pillars fell down, and they weren't able to rebuild the church after that. We also see from the top of Hippos, it's on top of a huge mountainside, and you kind of just can see all of Galilee, all 4 miles by 6 miles of it. And then again, a 4th century church was built. You just really can't get away from people building on top in the Middle East. You just keep on seeing over and over again This church was built here, but underneath it is most likely centuries of things that we're never going to be able to get to because this is an important site, so we're not going to take it apart to dig even deeper. And then you see with the Roman Forum, Rome had not only their forum, their marketplace, but they also built their temple. Obviously, somebody did not like the Romans because when they came in, they destroyed the temple and the forum. You kind of just see what's left after the destruction. And then you see how they took care of themselves. When you're in a desert culture and you're on top of a mountain, it's very important to have water. And so they let all the water funnel into a cistern on top of their hill. And that is just the top. You couldn't go down in it because it was all gated off. But I'll be able to show you in some pictures some of these cisterns that were huge as people dug it out and they retained water in there. You can also see their marketplace was a very long marketplace, and they tried to make sure that it was all together, and they used that same kind of stone called basalt stone. And it was a huge area on top of the hill that was for a marketplace. And what did they sell in the marketplace? They sold wine. They would put grapes or other kind of things that can be pressed, and they'd put their items right there, and then you know what they would do? Step on them. And then it would run down into these reservoirs right here. From here, it would go down into here, and then you'd have all your wine, and they must have drank a lot of wine, right? Roman culture. On top of Hippos, there was also a small theater. The Romans and the Greeks enjoyed their entertainment. And one of the most beautiful things I thought about was when I looked in that theater, they had it facing towards the mountainside, but not towards the water. And I thought, you know, how beautiful would it have been, like when you're going to see in Caesarea, how beautiful it would have been if they would have had it the other way, you know, enjoying this wonderful entertainment and then watching the Sea of Galilee with the moon hitting it, you know, beautiful. But they, for some reason, reversed it. There was also sites in Israel where they're commemorating different places where they think tradition has said there were events. So Jesus' fishes and loaves, there was a church that was built, and they said, this is the place. This is where it happened. So we went inside and got to take some pictures of beautiful mosaics. Again, later, but they had pictures of peacocks. They had pictures of different animals and birds that they had in their area. And then we move on to Megiddo. Now, just take a picture of this, right? Look how huge this mountain is. You can kind of see one gate here. You see another gate here. You can kind of see where they're going to show you. I'm going to show you their cistern right here. They had a grain silo about right here. They had all these stables that we're going to see. More stables here. This place was a fortress. And it was meant to be a place where if you were sieged on any and all sides, you were going to be okay for a while. Because you had a silo that had a bunch of food, you had a bunch of water, and you were going to be okay. So when you look at Megiddo, believe it or not, over thousands of years, Canaanites, then Egyptian, then the Canaanites again, then the Israelites, then the Egyptian again, then Israelite again, then Assyrians, then Israelite, then Egyptians, and then later Persians. There are over 30 different, what we call factions or nations, that have assumed that place as a place for themselves, as a fort, for centuries. You're going to see here the Bronze Gate. It is in the Canaanite period. Oh, I spelt that wrong. Oh, wow. You're also going to see, when you go there, if you go there, Iron Age 2 period, which was the Israelite Gate. You kind of don't see anything else because, again, what happened? People came in, destroyed, then they left, they built on top, they destroyed again, built on top. When you look at the Megiddo excavation, you can really see how they would dig, and if they thought something was more important underneath it, they would take everything carefully away, and then they would dig again. And then they found something else. And they said, is this important, or should we keep on digging? And thankfully, they kept on digging. Because here you're going to see how about 20 feet of dirt had 3 different civilizations on it at the different times. You can kind of see right here what would have been a Canaanite cultic site. On top of that was a Israelite worship site, and then on top of that was a later Israelite worship site. It's just amazing that they thought, hey, there's something deeper down here, and we need to keep on digging. So we're going to take down this Israel site, we're going to take down this other Israel site, and they kept on digging, they found the Canaanite. So that's about 3,500 years old that they've dug into. Then you get into Megiddo as a tell, over 30 different factions. Like, to me, I'm like, wow, that was an important place. And you have to wonder, why was it so important? Well, it was along a trade route, and depending on who you were at the time and who you were conquering at the time and your power at the time, this was a major place because of that trade route. If that trade route got taken over, guess what? You're not getting what you were supposed to be getting Tuesday. And because of that, this was a major place of conflict. Megiddo had Solomon's stables. King Solomon had thousands upon thousands of animals, and they stayed in stables. This is the northern stable right here. This would be the southern palace stables. So you can kind of see how large this complex would have been. You also see how King Jeroboam the second in the 8th century built this huge grain silo. Again, 8th century, you have people who are coming in and trying to conquer you because you're the main power. And they built this huge silo, which you can kind of see the bottom, but I think that's just the bottom of all the food that was not taken, right? It's just, it disintegrated into sand and dirt. And then you have the southern stables, which were King Ahab. You know that famous King Ahab that he had the battle with Baal against Elijah, right? That King Ahab. He also had stables on Megiddo. Megiddo had a very intense water system because of the siege. So the water would come in and it would go down this kind of like this hole that just continued to funnel. And as you go deeper, you're able to go down the water system. Just amazing how deep it is. You keep on going down stairs that go around the base and the sides, and you get to the bottom, and then the water goes for a good 100 feet down this tube, and then you have these huge, it almost looks like they're concrete, but they're made of rock that they made out of it, and it's like 20 feet by 50 feet tall by like 30 feet wide. Huge areas where they would have had their water. To me, it's just amazing how they would have engineered this kind of thing back in the 8th century, 9th century. And there was still water down there. Believe it or not, it still works, right? Not a whole lot of water, but still water. And then there was a back entrance to get out. Megiddo also had the Assyrians. There's not much left, obviously, because when the Greeks came in and destroyed a lot, that's what was left. But it's just amazing that, 5th century, 6th century, 7th century BC, we still have these rocks in this place that you can kind of see where the walls used to be and where things used to be and homes used to be. And have you ever heard of Armageddon? It comes from the idea of Har Megiddo, mountain of Megiddo. In Revelation chapter 16, verse 16, it was referenced to the battle between Pharaoh Necho, Egyptian, and King Josiah, when the Assyrian Empire was in decline, and Har Megiddo was where the fight happened in the field, in the mountains valley. King Josiah died in this battle in 2 Kings 23, 29 through 30, and Zechariah describes the battle in chapter 12, verse 11 of his book. He calls it the Valley of Megiddon. Then I moved to Caesarea Maritima. Caesarea, if you had a town and you wanted people to know who you were supporting, you would call it Caesarea. So we're going to see Caesarea Maritima, and then in the north part of the country later, we're going to see Caesarea Philippi. So in Caesarea Maritima, you're going to see tons of Roman things because it wasn't a Jewish town mostly. It was mostly Greek and then Roman. Under Greek control, it was something called Straton's Tower. And then under a person by the name of Alexander Jannaeus of the Hasmonean kingdom, this is the Maccabees. They later came to Herod the Great in 30 BC. Herod, a lover of Roman architecture and culture, built a large theater. It is still used today because they redid some of it. You can kind of see down there some seats, and it was actually a concert that day. So we had to get out of there before the concert started, but I just thought, how cool that they're still using things that are centuries old. And then you get to see the backside of the theater. I say they put this one right because you have the theater this way, and then you have the Mediterranean Sea out this way. And again, a beautiful sight. Next, you're going to see, as if you're making your way south to north in Caesarea Maritima, is Herod's palace. Herod's palace was also the place where Paul was under house arrest in Acts chapter 23, verse 33 through 35. Tiberius and Pilate's names are found on a stone here. This is a replica, but it just shows you that this idea of patronage, right? I'm going to name the city after this person. I'm going to build this building, and I'm going to do it for Tiberius, who's the emperor at the time. And Pilate's name's on there, which means Pilate was a real person, and he was actually a governor in that area at the time of Jesus. I have a picture of the real one that was in the Israel Museum later. Herod loved the culture of the Romans. He loved the entertainment of the Romans. So he built in Caesarea Maritima a place to entertain his friends when they came. And so there's this huge hippodrome. A hippodrome is a very, very long racetrack for horses and chariot races. And there was like a little spine, is what they call it, in the middle. And you can kind of still make out where the spine was. And again, what you do see is as the stairs go up, you see residential homes, not from the Roman times, but actually from the Byzantine times. So again, cultures building on top of cultures, but people kept on digging. You kind of see what it would look like, right? The horses, and how long that area is for them to race. You also saw in the city of Caesarea Maritima Roman latrines. They really perfected indoor plumbing, right? But not in your homes, but in a public area. How to flush all the stuff that you need to get flushed out, how to make sure that you're clean and have baths. But they also were very, very big in flaunting who they were. The bigger, the better. So if you can kind of picture this right here, next to where the baths are, this was just the base where the warehouse was. On top of this, right here, would have been a huge, with columns like you see on the Parthenon, and it was dedicated to Roma and Augustus, because Herod knew who he needed to be a patron of, right? He knew that if he didn't say, hey, look, I'm on your side, Caesar, he would have been not king of the Jews. You can kind of just picture how huge it would have been. I'm going to go back so you can kind of just picture that. This is just the warehouse. It's about 40 feet tall. And then on top of it, you'd have something like that. Imagine sailing in and going into the harbor and just seeing this huge monument to Caesar, and it reminded everybody who was in charge of the area. And then one of the things you're going to find out is that Herod the Great pretty much made everything that Jesus would have done and walked on would have been made by Herod the Great, or would have been under construction during the time of Herod the Great in order to be built by the time of Jesus. And Herod, he was a mastermind. He wanted to conquer nature. And so what better way to conquer nature than by building a harbor on the Mediterranean Sea? He was very smart. He found this technique where they had volcanic ash that once it touched water, it became like concrete. And he just made this break wall all the way out into the sea. And then he made it going around so that this break wall would not hurt the boats that are in the harbor during all of those Mediterranean storms and sea storms. And so this is kind of what's left of what he would have built. And again, you have thousands of years that people have also built on top of this. You have the people who came in as conquest crusaders, and then you also had the Muslim group that came in after the Crusaders and built on top of that. So, believe it or not, most of that whole picture has walls that were built by Crusaders all around it. But as you see, there was also other things that happened in Caesarea Maritima. There was a Roman cult in the 4th century called the Mithraeum. What they would do is they would have these warehouses, and they'd use them as their sacred cult sites. And so there was some of that in Caesarea Maritima. You also had the Byzantine governor's palace, which was built on top of the latrines. I don't know why you would want to build on top of a toilet, but they did. You also have Crusader walls. So, between the 1100s and the 1300s, Crusaders would have come into this harbor, and this would have been their fort as they fought against Muslims, and this would have been Muslims' fort as they fought against Crusaders as the area became back and forth. This is what it would have looked like from the top down. So you can kind of see this huge harbor that Herod would have built. You can see the palace that he would have built. You can see the hippodrome, and then later the stadium that they would have built. Here were the homes and the places where the Romans would have stayed and their barracks. Here is the theater that we saw and we went through. Outside of the city, there was another stadium. There was another Colosseum-like theater. And then as you go over here, this right here is a aqueduct that was a low-level aqueduct that Herod had built to get water from the mountains to Caesarea. Trajan, I believe. You also saw on the outside of the city a Jewish synagogue, but again, the sea of the Mediterranean has kind of taken over and just constantly washed little by little things away. And I only have one picture of Sepphoris just because it's not as important to us as Christians, but it could have been important, and here's why. Sepphoris was the major town near Nazareth, and so it's possible that Jesus would have done his shopping here. It could have been where he was employed to build things. We know Jesus is a carpenter, but that word tekton could also be translated as a stonemason. So you can kind of picture Jesus being employed and maybe walking from Nazareth to Sepphoris and being in this area and building something here. The northernmost part of the Israeli Empire was Dan. Tel Dan. Tel is just a place where you're digging and you find archaeology. And so here you can kind of see the beginning of the Jordan River. Look how intense it is. It's coming down the mountains. And then over here you can kind of see what they call the standing stones, or a cultic site in the city of Dan. There were many cultic sites in Dan because Dan was so far away from Jerusalem. They kind of did their own thing. They made up their own ways of doing things. But what you're going to find out is Dan also shows us some of the things that we read about in the Bible. One of those things is how the Canaanites were in this area before the Israelites. Here is a picture, and then on the side is a model of what this looked like back in probably about 3,500 years ago. So think about before the Canaanites invaded, this would have been one of the gates that would have been there. The Canaanite altar and this Canaanite mud brick are probably the oldest things in my presentation. So I'm kind of just wanting you to take a moment just to see that, because they have this huge thing over it so that it doesn't get destroyed by the rain because it's made of sand or in mud. But yeah, you can kind of still see some of the stones that they would have used. Kind of see how they built their entryway. In Tel Dan, as soon as you enter into their gate, you see a seat. That was the seat where the king would have judged and did things. And Amos is famous for calling out the king who was not at the gate and was not having justice at the gate. And that's because the king most likely was not doing what they were supposed to be doing. You also see in this second picture how the place in Dan had a winding, kind of zigzag pattern. As people would come in, they would go up this area, and it was very good for defense. They wanted to defend their camp. It ended up being destroyed, but this was one of the ways that they tried to prevent anybody from seizing them or from conquering them, was this zigzag pattern. And then inside their gates, they had what you call little pockets. So soldiers would hide in here and hide in here on either side. And as people came in, you're fighting three different ways. You're facing front of you, and then you got two people on the side that are trying to also take you down. So if you try to invade Dan, or mostly any of these places, they kind of all had this similar pattern of 3 gates, 2 gates, where people were fighting you at the gate so you didn't get further. They also had, kept on digging. I'm not sure why they stopped digging, but there was this huge area. It most likely probably was residential and industrial, but you can kind of still see those gates, how you had little pockets. And you would walk in and you'd be fighting all these people. And then this was they just kept on digging, but they didn't find what they were looking for, I guess. But you can kind of see walls of homes. And then Dan is also famous because it's the place where one of the golden calves that were made under King, it doesn't say the king, but in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 28 and 29, it says that 2 golden calves were made, and one was placed in Dan, the other was placed in Bethel. And so that would be a replica structure of what the horned altar of the cultic site would have done and would have looked like in Dan. Then I next went to Caesarea Philippi. Guess what? People built on top of things, and so right there you see the Byzantine church built right on top of something. And then you also realize that Caesarea Philippi was one of those cities of the Decapolis, and so it wasn't very much a Jewish site as much as a Greek and then Roman site. And what's interesting about this is it was originally called in Greek Panias, after the Greek god Pan, the god of the wild. And they believed that this right here was where Pan lived. And Pan lived at the gates of Hades. What does Jesus say when he goes to Caesarea Philippi about Peter? And the gates of hell will not conquer you. The picture on the right is looking at about 20 BC. Augustus gave this area to Herod the Great, and Herod followed In his death, gave it to his son, Philip. It became the capital of Philip's area and Philip's descendants, Agrippa the first and Agrippa the second. Both are mentioned in the book of Acts. This is just what some of the leftover after an earthquake ruins would have looked like. You have the temple of Zeus, you have the temple of Nemesis, you have a place where they worshipped the god Pan in a cult, and if you really want to know, you can go online and find out what they did in the Pan cult with goats there. Whew. So this is kind of just the picture of what it would have looked like next to that mountainside. This was the palace of Agrippa II. You can kind of see how large it would have been. It was further into the city, or into the area where this was in Caesarea Philippi. You can kind of just see how vast his palace was. There were stairs. There were stairs going downstairs. There were stairs going upstairs. He had an elaborate palace in Caesarea Philippi, and this was his home base, what he would call the capital of Galilee, or in the capital of the northern part of the kingdom. They also had Roman influence, and Roman soldiers lived there, and so they had what we called the north and south road, called a cardo. You can kind of see in this picture that they had columns going along the cardo. Which shows you that this is the path, and on either side you'd have shops to buy from. The Romans did it different, right? In the Jewish culture, you had homes that had their businesses in their homes, but in the Roman culture, you went to your business and you sold from your business. There's other sites I went to because they were important to the Jewish history. One of them was Gamla. Gamla was a site during the Jewish war with Rome. Similar to the other sites, it's next to the Sea of Galilee. And this was a long walk down, and a long walk up, and then a long walk down, and then a long walk up. And we realized that there was a bus stop where we didn't have to go up and down. But that was after the fact. But this was a very treacherous journey, and you realize when the Romans came, they came through the valley. They didn't come down the ancient road going zigzag down a mountainside. I'm glad I wore my hiking boots that time. But they also, you can see a first century synagogue, what it would have been laid out like. You can kind of see how their industrial complex and their homes were together. You can see where the Romans attacked with their catapults and their bastillas, and how they hit the wall and destroyed the wall. You can kind of see how that road was. This is going up. Remember I said I went down and up? That was the path. It was very treacherous. But you also see in Galilee, the Byzantine church also built on Gamla. You can kind of see the picture. This is how far it was away from the Sea of Galilee, right here. Where this was the Sea of Galilee, and these were the mountains that went to Gamla. The next place is Bet Shan. It's not as important in the New Testament, but you might have heard of it in the Old Testament. Bet Shan was the site following the battle on Mount Gilboa in 1004 BC, where the Philistines took the bodies of King Saul and his son Jonathan and hung them on the side of the city walls to show that they had done. David then rescued the bodies and gave them a proper burial. On the tell, we can see both Israelite and Egyptian. So here's the Israelite. You kind of can see most of it. You can kind of see where they did their squares here. And then it was also Egyptian. It was the governor's house. This is, they built up a replica, but they just kind of show you where the stones were when they took them out, to show you that not only was this a site for the Philistines and the Israelites, but this was a site also in the Egyptians, in the Canaanites, and all over. And then later, it became part of the Romans. And the Romans, they built a theater. They built their toilets. And I joke with Wendy about this. When you go to the toilets in Rome, bring your own sponge. That was the sponge water to wipe yourself. Yeah. Don't ask to borrow somebody else's sponge. They also had east and west streets that were still able to see. Again, you'll notice the main streets are because of the columns. You can kind of see where the road was. And they also had businesses along the columns, and then they also had businesses in here. Another picture of the east and west side streets. And then in Bet Shan, they also had a Roman amphitheater. They most likely had lions in those little squares that you see right here, where they might have fed Christians to the lions, or they might have done other things with gladiatorial battle. But it was just an interesting amphitheater that was still just in the middle of the city, and you're just like, wow, nobody is even here, and you don't see anybody even walking around, but this is a site in the middle of modern-day Bet Shan. And then again, you see the Byzantine people who have built on top of it. This is one of those things I told you about. So-and-so donated this and made this. They were all over. I was shocked. They also had bathhouses, and thankfully, they kept up with the Roman technique of what we call a caldarion, and they had the heat going underneath the stone, and if you wanted yourself in a jacuzzi, you could find it in both Roman times as well as Byzantine times. I bet that's why they called it the Dark Ages, because they lost that technology. Jacuzzis. One of the sites that I got to go to was Samaria. In Samaria, you had to go through a bunch of guards, and you had to leave Israel to go to the Palestinian territory. And so Samaria was actually part of the Palestinian territories. In this picture right here, you can kind of see Greek wall right here, and then right here would be Herod's wall. You can tell because there's like this little cut around the stone. And then here you see the Roman Forum, which is where the Romans did their marketplace. They didn't sell out of their homes, they went to work and they sold out of their work. There was also, on the other side, the Jewish area, which was residential and industrial, and unfortunately, because this was in Palestinian territory and not Israel territory, it really wasn't taken care of. You can kind of see how all the grass is overgrown. All the grass is overgrown in this area. You can kind of see how it's just, they're not really taking care of it like the other places that you see in Israel. You also see that there was an influence of Roman and Greek culture, because when you go up these stairs right here, you end up going to the temple of Zeus, or the temple of Roma and Augustus again, because that's who they wanted to support. And it would have been most likely on top in this area right here, where you would have gone through the columns and entered into the Roman pagan site to worship that god. Herod had a major influence. Again, like I said, he had his Herodian tower. That was a massive, probably 20-foot diameter. And then a theater that you look out and you see the beautiful scenery of Israel. And then I went to Bethlehem, which is actually in Palestinian territory. And even though it didn't have much archaeology, it is well known as the birthplace of Jesus. And there is a church that is built to commemorate it. And the writings of Scripture by Jerome into Latin is a cave in this place. And you can kind of just sit there and just think, this guy was in this basement, this cave, and he was writing the Old Testament and the New Testament from Hebrew and Greek and some Aramaic into Latin, because that was the new language of the world, the Roman world. And then I kind of had a replica out there, a small one, but this is the Qumran community, a group called the Essenes, or the Qumran community, depending on who you're reading from, was a group that decided they were going to leave society because society was wicked, and they were kind of like monastics. They wanted to go out like monks and live as people who were going to be righteous outside of all the evil of the world. Qumran, in this community, they abandoned, they found this fort that was abandoned in 150 BC, and they just started kind of taking over. You can kind of see one of the remaining towers that they would have had, and then you can kind of see how they would just live and do the Jewish thing, right? You would have your study room and your residential room. You would have your business in your residential room. You would do your scribe work and translate different things. And you also made sure you took your mikveh bath for purity ritual. And because you needed a lot of water, and it was in the desert, and this was like desert where it's like sand, you need a lot of water. So they had cisterns, and then there's me in the background. You can kind of see just how small some of these rooms were, how the cisterns kind of fed into, and then again the arid desert near the Dead Sea. You just kept on going further and further south and down. Across from where the Dead Sea community lived, they were afraid that something was going to happen, so they had all their scrolls, and they put them in these jars, which you can kind of see mine out there as a replica, and they hid them in caves like this. Hundreds of scrolls were found. And these scrolls have so much information, and with new technology, they're able to even dig deeper with doing ultrasounds of the ink, and be able to see how, if they were to unroll it, what they'd be able to see. So it's just amazing. They have some of the scriptures that we have with the Old Testament, like Isaiah, but they were not part of the New Testament community, so they did not have any New Testament texts. Jericho is a very ancient city. It's also in the Dead Sea area. Believe it or not, 10,000 BC was when they think Jericho became a city and had people coming to it and working together as a city. As one of the oldest towns, there was many layers. Right here, we see pre-Israelite conquest walls. That same sand mud brick that we saw was used. You can kind of see right here the wall of one of the old ones, and then this is kind of behind the wall. They also had to do things were falling apart, so they try to make little diagrams of what would have been there with concrete to show residential homes. You can kind of see before Israel came, they had towers that they were building right here. And you can kind of see more of a wall that was built. You can still kind of make out some of the bricks. But again, erosion has decimated this very ancient site. And one of the cool things was this door. This was like a gate back in the day. And you think when Joshua came, all the walls of Jericho came down. But was that just the outer walls? And did they have inner walls? And what did the inner walls look like? You think about the whats. And so when I came to Jericho, I was like, wow, this is a very big area. but all of the current structures that are still there are all kind of on the inside of this area that goes further out. So you almost wonder, did the outside walls fall and the inside walls, had to be fought through and things like that. Here is a picture of a pre-Israelite tower, most likely 1500 BC. Right here. Can you see this part of the tower right there? And then the next in that area, I'm just kind of jumping in the areas because that's how the travel went, was one of Herod's palaces, Talul Abdu al-Alik. This was a place where they again did not take care of the area. We went over this bridge that honestly I was afraid of crossing, and we did it 3 times. It was crazy, but this place was not well kept up. But it was Hasmonean. That means that it was in the empire of the Jewish people following the Maccabean revolt. And the descendants of them ended up becoming the Hasmonean Empire. And then Herod ended up marrying one of them and became part of that dynasty. Tulul in Jericho, they both fell under Hasmonean and then Roman rule. And then with Cleopatra fighting, and then Herod the Great began to have his influence over Marcus Antony. And then the Hasmoneans, princes, had twin pools and palaces that they built there. So you can kind of see those twin palaces, or the twin pools right there. You can kind of see how Herod the Great built his winter palace with a pool. Make sure I get the right one. So this is Herod's, one side is Herod's palace. That's kind of the other side of the palace. And then you look across the chasm and you see this mound right here, and that was one of his palaces. So he had like 3 palaces in this one area. But then he had his pools. And this is only probably about 15 feet from here to here. But he would just swim in circles. And then right here was a sunken garden. Probably he hosted people at like garden parties. He was a very big entertainer. He also built public pools for the people that served him. So this was a very deep pool. You can kind of see the one side, and then if you really wanted to go deeper, you'd go to the other side. And then right here you can kind of still see the mosaic that he would have had. But notice, it's just shapes. He doesn't have any animals. He doesn't have any design. So you always wonder with Herod, is he really Jewish, or is he really following the customs of Judaism and not having no idolatry? But then he builds these huge things to Rome with gods and things like that. So Herod's always been an interesting character to me when I study Herod the Great. He also most likely had a disease where he went crazy. So he did kill his kids. So he was crazy. And you kind of see here what would have been gardening. They would have had different plants here and plants here. They would have been down here walking, and they'd have plants on this wall. And then you'd also have a group right here pouring stuff into here and most likely making some kind of activity or doing something for their industry. Again, this site was not, there was no signs, you couldn't know what was going on. You just realized that somebody was digging and they kind of just stopped. So I'm not sure what happened. This is the only picture I have for Solomon's pools, but they're not Solomon's pools. He didn't build them. They were built by the Hasmoneans, but everyone calls them Solomon's pools. They are these huge pools the size of a football field that are like 30 to 40 feet deep because you need water to survive in the desert. You're going to notice reservoirs are a theme. So there we get to Masada. And many of you have already heard of Masada because of the Jewish revolt and the they say that there was a suicide that happened, a mass suicide that happened on top of the mountain. They believe that was not true. They say that there were some people, but the story goes because they want people to know that Rome was vicious. But you kind of just see, it looks like an aircraft carrier, right in the middle of the desert. And on top of it was where the Jewish people would have lived, right here. And there was this path that you could go up called the Snake Pass, and it would take you all the way up to the top. But thankfully, there was a cable car right about there that took me all the way up, so I didn't have to go up and down. And what's amazing to me is you still saw the remnants of the Romans, right? This was one of the Roman encampments still made. They built that just to do a 3-year siege, right? This really long siege that they were waiting for the Jewish people just to give up, and they didn't give up. They stayed on top of that mountain for quite a long time. And then later, I was able to see the Roman encampments down here. They were all over. There was like one here, there was like one over there, there's a big one behind. They were serious about warfare, the Romans were. Masada was a place near the Dead Sea, which was first used as a fort by Alexander Janus, who was part of the Hasmonean Empire. Herod the Great took the fort around 40 BC and used the fort to keep his mother, his sisters, and his fiancée Miriam secure with 800 guards. When the water reservoir was low, they prayed, and there was a miracle, rain, that filled up this reservoir. And again, that's about 40 feet deep, if not 50 feet deep. To be filled with that much rain, you just kind of can imagine that kind of a miracle. But in Masada, you also had more information with the people who were rebels. They used these right here to keep pigeons, or what we would call doves. And they used the doves for meat. And doves constantly made more babies, and that's what they ate, was doves in this time of revolution. And you also see the ramp that the Romans had built. So I'm looking down at the ramp. They built this huge, massive ramp to go up and try to storm the citadel right here. It just reminds you that if you were in war with Rome, Rome was serious, and they were coming after you, and they were going to get you. I couldn't imagine what it was like living in Masada during the 68 to 74 era. You also saw in Masada Romans and how they were doing their thing with the war. And then later you're going to see Herod the Great. This right here is Herod the Great. He built on the side of the Masada 3 different palaces, 1, 2, 3, and then I guess technically there's a 4th palace on the other side, so that he could have which way the wind was blowing, he could get a good breeze. But you can kind of just see Herod, even though he was crazy, he had a good taste for color. And this is what was left over from Herod the Great's time. Here you can kind of just see again more Roman encampments. 1, 2, right there. They were all over watching. Masada, because of its location, had to have a lot of storage. So they had these storehouses that had a bunch of pots in them, and the pots had a bunch of food and other things in them. You also, this is the picture. So here's his 3 palaces. The lowest one, the middle one, and then the top one. And we took a stairway going this way to go down to see it. Again, just the massive size of the palace. Right here, you can kind of see the floor, most likely maybe a dining room. And then here, you can kind of see the floor of what would have been the beginning of his middle palace. He had a great design for Roman architecture, so he built similar things that Roman built with columns, colonnades, making sure that he showed his style of red and green. We also see in Masada places where people would try to do mikvahs, and also some more cisterns. In Herod's second palace, on the other side of the town, he built this bathhouse, more colonnades, more design that he built. But again, notice, no animals, just shapes. Bless you. With the decorated walls, his palaces, and his creative ideals, he showed that he was a man who had the desire to conquer nature. Oh, this picture. So this is the edge of Masada. That was the mountain that the Romans were looking in. You know, you think that you're safe, but when somebody has a higher leverage point looking down, they know everything that you're doing. They can see everything that you're doing. Beersheba is the furthest south point in Israel. Here is a picture of a four-horned altar used for cultic worship, believed to have been destroyed by King Hezekiah's reforms in 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 4. I have a picture later where I'm in the museum in Israel, and they actually have the actual item that was here in Beersheba. So Beersheba is the southernmost part of Israel. It's a place of cultic practices during the king's reforms, and Amos condemns it for the cultic practices. Earlier, Abraham's well is mentioned in Genesis chapter 21, verse 23 through 33, and then Isaac builds an altar here because of Yahweh's promise, and then in Genesis 26, 15 through 33, and then Jacob receives a vision in Beersheba to take his family to Egypt in Genesis chapter 46, 1 through 7. So even though Beersheba is not a New Testament site, it's very important in the Old Testament. This was a picture of the gate. You can kind of still see that same pattern in 10th century, most likely built by King David, where you had these walls, and in order to get in, you had to fight through multiple ways. Kind of see the gates. People would hide in those gates to fight. And most likely there was a place right here where the king sat to do judging. These are storehouses where they would had items for storage. During the conquest in Beersheba, it was the area of Simeon, and then incorporated later into the kingdom of Judah. The following would have been much of the fortified town that King David had built. Kind of see some more storage houses and homes. Again, similar to the other sites, residential and industrial areas are together. And then at the end of my time in Beersheba, we went down to what they had as a reservoir. It wasn't as huge as the one at Megiddo, but it was pretty deep as well. And we went through it, and we came out the other side. So then we got to the city of David, Jerusalem, and we were outside of the temple platform, and you could see the destruction of the temple. You could still see bricks that were most likely destroyed during the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. What was right here was a bridge that would take you up to the Temple Mount. Steps that led up to the Gate of Huldah, which was the exit out of the Temple Mount, had been stoned in because of defenses by the Crusaders. You can kind of see the gate here. 1, 2, 3. But you also saw walls that were built in the 1000s BC. You notice as you go through this area, an archaeological site, you see residential and what? Industrial together. You were able to see the walls that are not only 10th century walls, but then you also see Crusader walls. And then you also see the homes, again, residential. There's a lot of homes on the outside of the city. But here you see reservoirs. They, again, really needed their water. So they had reservoirs all over the place. But these aren't the biggest ones in Jerusalem. If you're Jewish, the Western Wailing Wall is important to you. It's a place where you're able to touch the wall and get as close as you can to a place where your ancestors had worshipped and lived. But with the City of David Archaeology, they give an opportunity for Jewish people to worship as close as you can get to the Holy of Holies. And that is a underground synagogue, which you'll see in a picture soon. But I was able to go underground and walk along the western wall in this tunnel system. You're able to see here that bricks that would have fallen down, that was the stairs going up to the Temple Mount. And then right here, this would be another way to get to the Temple Mount. And right here, I'm in this area underground. And the Western Wailing Wall is currently right there, that people are able to go and be at. You're able to see how the arches that built this ramp can still be seen underneath Jerusalem. Here's the synagogue that the people who are Jewish worship at, as close as they can get to the Holy of Holies. And you can kind of still see some of Herod-style bricks that he used to build. This is that cut that I was telling you that Herod had his people build. Just kind of a pushed out square, and then you had the rest of it kind of cut. And then the City of David, you continue to walk through a very close path. You had this part of the wall, and then you had this part right here that was part of the other part of the city, and you had to walk through it. It was pretty close. And then they also had reservoirs, and this was just one of them, but there were many. And this, I'm not sure how deep it was, but it was the size of half of a football field underneath part of Jerusalem, where there were fish in there swimming. I'm not sure if they were placed there or what, but it was just interesting that there was a lot of water underneath the city of Jerusalem. When we came out from that tour underneath Jerusalem, we went to the traditional condemnation of Jesus. It's a church, and it's where they believe that Jesus was condemned. It was most likely a later fort, not the one that's mentioned in the Bible, but a later fort that was built and most likely was a fort after the time of Jesus. But tradition says that this is the fort. This is an old Roman road that the fort had been built on. And then all over Jerusalem you had these things on the side, statues representing the Stations of the Cross, and you're able to do kind of a prayer and meditation, which we'll do partly at the end. In the City of David, we went back underground, and we went on the east side of the city. northeast, I guess maybe northeast, west, southeast side of the city. This is the current archaeological site of the city of David as they are digging, trying to find more things. But then you're able to see some beautiful 10th century walls from the city of David. You can kind of see what might have been a tower, and then would have gone up. Right here you see an administrative center that was built into the wall that was meant to be a place where people came, and it actually has a name of one of the people who was in the Bible, Ahel, A-H-E-L, who was an administrator with David. Throughout the city of David, you can kind of see more towers that were built and how things kept on going up to try to protect it. Yeah, Ahil, A-H-I-E-L. Chronicles 15:13, I think it says. And then what was really cool and a little scary was going down what they call the Warren Shaft. It was a Canaanite tunnel that was meant to bring water to a place in the Canaanite time, but later it became a place where Hezekiah would build a tunnel for water that would go to the pool of Siloam, where Jesus healed a person with mud. So you can kind of see how tight it is in this cave, but they would have used their tools to make it a little bit bigger. And then here is the Canaanite tunnel, right here. Again, I had to go sideways down this with my backpack to get through. And then here's the beginning of the Hezekiah tunnel. So these people dug the Hezekiah tunnel from this side, and the other people began it on the other side in the south part of the town, and they met within an inch. Like, that's amazing to me. But it was a very tight fit. I didn't go down the Hezekiah tunnel, I went down the Canaanite tunnel because I didn't want to get wet. You can kind of see here still all these walls and most likely residential homes on the side. And this was a tool that they used to move the bricks. When I got down to the furthest part of Jerusalem, we went to the Pool of Siloam. This is currently under construction, or archaeology dig. Over here, there was a guy actually digging and writing down what he was finding. But you can just imagine the pools just having steps upon steps, trying to get to the bottom. And this is probably the outmost part of the walls where the water was. If you can kind of see, this is my story of going here at the Pool of Siloam and going up a first century sewer right here. Some people call it the Pilgrim Road. Apparently we didn't take the Pilgrim Road, we took the sewer. There's the Pilgrim Road on this side, and we took the sewer on this side. Right there. Can you imagine going hundreds of feet, not in the dark, but down an old sewer? It's one of my stories that I get to tell people. But the cool thing was that the sewer led out at an archaeological site that's actually currently being done right now. If you want to buy property in Jerusalem, you might not want to buy property in Jerusalem, because the people known as the Giovanni bought property, and as they bought the property, they had an issue because they found something. And as they dug, they went through Byzantine and other cultures, and now currently they're at another culture, which is most likely 2nd and 3rd century. Right there. The Giovanti parking lot excavation. Can you imagine buying something for millions of dollars and then you can't do anything with it because they found something? But thankfully they did, and we got more archaeology and more coins. In one of their finds, they found, I think, 2,400 coins dating back to the Byzantine period. They found Seleucid, which is Greek fortress. They also found a seal that had the name Nathan Melech, which is actually a biblical name, most likely from 2 Kings 23, verse 11. This right here is a replica of what Jerusalem would have looked like during the time of Jesus. As the Israelite Museum, it is depicted of what Jerusalem would have looked like, including Herod's palace. So you can kind of see right here the outskirts of what would have been the city, the walls of Jerusalem at that time, the Temple Mount, and what it would have looked like during the time of Jesus, the court of the women, and then later the court of the Gentiles out there. You got the pools of Bethsaida, and then Herod's 3 towers. We're going to see that in a second. Not the towers were destroyed, but you'll see that the places. The largest tower was known as Faisal, named after Herod the Great's brother. The second tower was named Hippicus, after a friend. And then the third tower, the smallest, was Mariamne, his love, who is the smallest tower, but also people believed was the most beautiful. In Israel, so this is that cultic horned altar that was used in Bethsaida, Beersheba. And here's a little stone that says that the Israelites were conquered. You're going to see a lot of that. More cultic pictures. They used different horned altars here. They also carved different things. This is one of the Yahweh cultists. Yahweh is God, but they incorporated it with other things. And that's a lamb up there, I believe. And there's lions and other things having to do with this picture. You also see replicas of bulls or Baal, and more horned altars representing strength. This would have been a site where they would have put their standing stones and they would have worshipped in what they would have called their Holy of Holies. Here in this picture, you see where it says, "And there they anointed King David." David, right there. Oh, wait, right there. David, D-A-V. Here you can see a picture of where King Uzziah died, where the name Uzziah is there. You also see what they call bullae. Bullae are the seals that you have a scroll and you have a seal on top of the scroll. So they found all these bullae, and they had the names of the kings of Israel and also Hasmonean kings. So not that one, but right here is a seal of Asi, the son of Jeriehu, who was a king. Here you see a seal of Jezebel, the wife of Ahab. Here you can see a seal of Ahab, or Shalom, the son of Ahab. And then that's another thing that says, "I made this." It's pottery. More cultic sites activity. They would pour water in this, and it was called a libation offering. Here, this picture is of the Moabite, the king of Moab said, "I did such and such, and I conquered the people of Israel." Here is a picture of this huge relief of the Battle of Lachish. In 701, I believe Sennacherib was one of the ones that commissioned that painting. You also see Sennacherib's cylinder right here, where he talks about how he conquered the Israelites. I don't know about you, but you see people's names on Stanley Cups and you see people's names on trophies. This is the back then trophies, right? People are like, look, I defeated the Israelites, and here's proof, because I wrote it down. We also see pictures of fragments from King Sargon. This would be in cuneiform. And there's an interesting story about Sargon and how he was birthed and born, similar to a story of Moses. There's also inscriptions on this right here. It's an inscription that says, if you are a Gentile and you pass this line, you will die. So we see that in the Bible, that if you passed a certain point in the temple area, there was a sign apparently that said you would die. That's the sign. We have it. Also, Herod the Great was a very big, important person. In a later picture I'll show you, in Herodium, there's a mausoleum area, and in the mausoleum area they found Herod's sarcophagus. It's interesting that he wanted a sarcophagus because that was not his thing, his religion, but he had a sarcophagus. And there's also part of his area where he would have had a heated pool, because when you're king of the Jews and you got the money, you build a hot tub for yourself in the middle of the desert. Most interesting is that they found what they call an ossuary. What people did back then was they'd put you in a tomb for a year. Your body would decompose and leave your bones. They would take your bones and put them in these little coffins called an ossuary. The most interesting thing about this ossuary is that it says Caiaphas, chief priest. Caiaphas was one of the chief priests during the time of Jesus. Here's that actual stone that says Pontius Pilate built this administrative building for Tiberius Caesar. So that was in Caesarea Maritima. You also find out that they did crucifixions many different ways. This was a person who was crucified, and here are the stone or the nails that they put in his heels, that way. So it just makes you think, Jesus, we traditionally think that he was crucified through his wrists. Some people depict it as the being crucified through his hands. Other people, we think about him being crucified with his feet together and one nail going through it. But here we see evidence that it went through a heel that way. So it just makes you wonder. I mean, it's important, but it's not one of the essentials of the faith, how Jesus was crucified. But he was crucified. We also see more things that says, hey, I beat the Israelites. Vespasian was a emperor later, but he was a general, and he defeated the Israelites. We see here one of the groups of people who were part of Rome, the Roman 10th Legion. They ended up printing things, putting their stamp on it, and said, Rome was here, the 10th Legion was here. These are tiles that would have gone in a place, possibly a home or a road. And this was a thing that said the 10th Legion in Israel. Israel also had a ton of Greek culture and a bunch of Roman culture in it. So if you ever go to the Israel Museum, you'd see pictures of the Athena, the goddess of war. You'll see Greek over doorways and doorposts saying, blessings on you, or blessings on the people who enter here from the goddess so-and-so. We also find a lot of Roman heads. It's not that their bodies were not important, it's just people destroyed everything, but for some reason they left the heads, or busts, or other things. I believe there was one statue in the museum that was of Vespasian, I think, but it had to do with it had his body armor, but it didn't have his head. I went to Israel in Jerusalem a second day. Went through the Jaffa Gate this time. Jaffa Gate is near the northwestern part where you get to Herod's Jerusalem palace. In Herod's palace, he has both Crusader and the Muslim conquest. They have put their own little spin on Herod's palace. But if you ever are able to look at what they think Herod's palace would have been like, that most likely was the place that Jesus was actually condemned, because Jesus being condemned there makes more sense because that was Pilate's headquarters after Herod the Great died. But again, you see different Roman staves that people would have used as they went into battle. You're able to see Roman cannonballs that they would have used as they conquered Jerusalem. You're able to look at different towers that would have held those three towers. And you get a good picture on one of those towers of the Temple Mount. So when when you think about Pilate looking out and seeing all the commotion that's happening on the Temple Mount, he most likely had a very good vantage point of everything that was happening. This is a place that was actually used as a prison or a jail. And then they find early 1900s, and then they started to dig and they found some cool archaeology. They're still doing archaeology, as you can see. They still have ladders going down further and further into this, what would have been a storehouse for Herod the Great. Here's what it would have looked like. So you have the Faisal, Hippicus, and then Miriami towers. You would have had little areas, or what they call porticos, a really long area with columns. And then you had the administrative buildings on either side. And this is most likely where Jesus would have been condemned, not on this area where that fortress is. What's most interesting, though, is that if he was condemned here and he went out the Jaffa Gate, the Holy Church of the Holy Sepulchre is right here outside of the town. So he would not have had to have walked a really long place, a long path. But if he was beaten as much as we know that he was, Simeon, who helped him, just makes you realize that this is all real. It's all happened. Here's where the place of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where they believe that Jesus traditionally was not only crucified but also buried. As you enter into the church, you find that they have little graves that you can kind of walk into, and then you step in, and there's a little bit further. There's like little clusters of graves. One of the things I didn't like when I went there was I was so used to archaeology, right? You find stones and you find other things, but when you go into the churches, it's just so gold and built up, and it's more for veneration, which I understand why. I guess being the archaeologist, you just want to see something as it was, not ordained with everything. But you kind of see, this is the picture outside of the tomb of Jesus. There's different people waiting in line, and people would go inside. They'd get maybe like 10 seconds, and then they were told they had to get out. But then you also have where Jesus was crucified, and there's a stone right here, but you have to wait in line to get to see the stone that they think that was the place where the cross was. What I was able to do, though, was I was able to take a picture of the stone where the mountain, or Golgotha was. And what I noticed as I went down further into the area was that many Christians during the Crusades, because this church was already there, they would put little stone crosses, and they carve little crosses, and just kind of a reminder that, hey, I was here, I prayed, and I was here at the feet of Jesus. Then later we went to what was the pool of Bethsaida. You're going to be shocked because this is the deepest I think I've seen any kind of archaeology that we've gone. They had a church right outside the pools of Bethsaida, and it says you need to be silent in here unless you're going to sing. And so when you walked in, it was just constant singing, and it was beautiful. Just a reminder that you can still have fun while you're doing like this pilgrimage. So what was interesting about Bethsaida is how deep the bottom of the pool was from the porticos, the things that kept up things, the roof. And yet, how crazy is that you still had up here area where like 40 feet of a difference, maybe Roman times built. And then you also see some influences by the Crusaders, but again, it's just 40 to 60 feet drop in this pool of Bethsaida. But you can still see the columns and what they would have possibly looked like, and the edge of the wall that would have held the water in, and then there were some steps right here. It just kind of makes you remember and think how massive this pool was. You see this layer right here, and how they built the stone is different than this layer right here, where they built this stone. So it just kind of shows you the cultures building on top of the cultures, especially on top of pools. And later, you see in Rome, they built these reservoirs, and they built these stones that are different. Here's what a Roman reservoir would have looked like. Very structured, has the bricks in an arc form. Then I entered into the Damascus Gate. That was the northern gate. We went to the Garden Tomb, which is the northern part. If Jesus' condemnation happened at that traditional site and had gone to this Garden Tomb north of the city, this was probably the best depiction of what a stone that was in front of a grave that could have been rolled away would have looked like. And then you can kind of see in this picture the eyes, that if this was Golgotha, the place of the skull, you do see eyes, kind of a nose right there. So again, we don't know officially where Jesus was crucified and where he was buried, but we do see two possibilities of where he could have been crucified and buried. Inside of the Garden Tomb, there were two benches, most likely where you'd lay the body on either side. It was a wealthy tomb because it was spacious compared to the poor tombs where you had a cluster of people and you just kind of put the people in and waited a year until you got their bones. Thankfully, we didn't have to wait a whole year for Jesus, right? 3 days. When I went to the Rockefeller Museum, they had replicas and actual stelae, which is one of these big things that said so-and-so conquered so-and-so. This first one is one of Seti of Egypt's victory stelae that he wrote when he conquered Bet-Shan. Here is the second one. These things are probably 7 feet tall by 3 feet. They're massive. And then there's a statue of Ramses III, among other items of archaeological importance, but because the Rockefeller Archaeology Museum, I didn't want to get too much into the same things that we already saw. This is just a picture of what would have looked like for one of Herod's reservoirs. You did see the full one of Solomon's pools. This is a 30-foot deep by maybe 2 football fields wide reservoir. Steps going into the reservoir to get your water and then come back out. It just reminds you, water is important for what? People in the desert. And then my last few days, I got to go to Herodion. That's not how you spell it. I guess I was tired when I wrote that one. But this is the administrative center at the bottom of the city. Again, with a pool, because I'm Herod and I'm rich. And then on top of this, the mountain, I'm going to build a citadel because I'm going to conquer nature. This is the mausoleum that they found his sarcophagus in. And this was what I call his party room, where he would host his guests, but also a theater that they could all have entertainment. And again, he did it the right way. You're looking out at the beautiful countryside. So you see here where they would have had entertainment. Also this really long staircase, because what's more intimidating than if you're going up to see the king and you have to walk up this really, really, really long staircase. I'll show you again. That was the staircase. That's a lot of stairs. Here's the picture of the mausoleum, what's left of the archaeological dig. This is what it would have looked like. Many storage areas, many staircases, a downstairs, a kind of upstairs area, an area where he could have his garden and have food. But also this was a place that after Herod died, the people in the Jewish revolt took over, and they had a sieged campaign against them, and those were Roman cannonballs, stone balls. This is what it would have looked like inside of Herod's entertainment area. He would have had paintings of his friends' biggest things. One of those big things was Marcus Antony, and Marcus Antony's defeating of somebody important, and he just wanted to, in a way, tell Marcus Antony, hey, you're my best friend. I appreciate everything that you're doing for me. Thank you for letting me rule this area. But when Marcus Antony died and Tiberius Caesar came in charge, Herod's famous words were, don't think of whose friends I've been, think of what kind of a friend I've been. I've been a good friend to Marcus Antony, I'll be a good friend to you. And so Herod got on Tiberius's good side, plus he built a lot of things for Tiberius just to say, hey, I'm on your side, don't forget, hey, I'm on your side. Inside of Herodium, you see more stairs going up to his chambers. You see, when you get there, this huge area where he would have had his garden and just beautiful sunlight. But underneath it, you had different places for dining, and this ended up becoming a synagogue during the revolt. You had a bath area. Oh, this is the garden area. You had a bath area that had the cold water, the hot water, and then kind of like a steam room is what they believe. This is the synagogue that was made out of his dining room. And it just kind of shows you the massive walls of the tower that went all the way up right here. And they're still building the replica so that people could see how far he could see out. But just imagine, you see all this right here. You can keep an eye on everybody. And you can make sure that if people were coming to get you, you have people watching from the watchtower. Well, what's even more intense is this huge tower that he built right here for observing had so many different layers going down for his people that were living there and his quarters. But just in case, if people were coming to attack you, you needed to have a route to get out. So there were tunnels that led to reservoirs, but also tunnels that led to getting out quick if you needed to. Because Herod was paranoid. He didn't want to be killed or anything. He thought he was invincible. But you can kind of see right here another pool that he had down in his administrative center. Because when you're Herod and you have multiple palaces, you need to have multiple administrative centers. And then here you can kind of see on ground level how tall that mountain was or the hill was that he built up. And then just some pictures of the administrative center and that pool that he made that had a little island in the middle that he could jump off back into the water. And so as we start to get ready to wind down, I just want to take a moment. When I was on this pilgrimage to Israel, it was a lot of education, a lot of head knowledge. But my last day there, I really wanted to just experience the spiritual side of my faith. I had learned so much about archaeology and so much about who Jesus is, things about the background of Jesus, things about the background of Herod. I just felt like I needed some spiritual things. So this last day I thought about how Jesus was on the Mount of Olives looking down at Jerusalem his last week of living before his crucifixion. And as he walked down the Mount of Olives, he would have passed tombs. Not these tombs. These tombs were Muslim tombs, but he would have walked by what they called the Tomb of the Prophets. He would have seen the entry gate right here, which is actually right down here. This is the top of the gate that's closed. This is the modern gate that Jesus would have entered. It's underneath a bunch of tombs of Muslims. He would have passed by the Garden of Gethsemane. You can just imagine that day after his meal with his disciples that he was praying for them, for you and me. As he continued to go down the Mount of Olives, he would have passed down at the bottom of the valley Absalom's pillar and another site representing a prophet. And maybe, just maybe, he looked back at the Mount of Olives and thought, I'm going to do this for these people. I didn't get to go through the Golden Gate, obviously, because Muslim graves cover it and there's no way in. So I had to go a little bit further north, walking a little bit farther than Jesus would have that day. And I went through the Lion's Gate, which is on the northeastern part of the city. As I walked through the city the last time, I looked at the different stations of the cross. I tried not to think about, well, he could have died here, he could have died there. He could have been buried here, he could have been buried there. I just kind of just went through the steps of the tradition down what they call the Via Dolorosa, looking at the different stations and just reflecting on where he was condemned, where he was beaten, where he was told to carry his cross, where he was carrying his cross and he fell and they asked Simeon to carry it for him. The many times that maybe he fell down carrying the cross for me, for you, as he made his way to Golgotha. I just thought about, as I walked through the streets, people were just there buying and selling. I often think that day they were probably doing the same thing. And Jesus was carrying his cross and people were mocking him, maybe spitting on him. And as we get closer and closer to the death of Jesus, after each station, I think about how we got to that place. This is the picture of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, right here. And about even on that day, God's light was still shining on his Son. And the Son was glorifying the Father with his death. But then I also thought, on that same day that Jesus died, his disciple who said, Jesus, you are the Lord, you are the Messiah, was the first one to deny him. And at the church that reminds us of Peter's denial, there's a rooster on top of a cross. Is this the possible site that day Peter ran out of this town? And guess where he went? A residential and industrial place. And people noticed and said, hey, you're that guy with the Jesus. You were with that guy. No, I wasn't. No, I don't even know him. Denying him 3 times. One of the stories I love is the story of redemption. And in a way, archaeology and tradition shows us that there was redemption for Peter. Because the same place that Peter possibly denied Jesus 3 times was the same place that is believed by tradition that Peter was in prison, and they threw him into this area, and some people call it a cistern. Other people believe that Peter was in prison there. But if tradition stands, the same place that Peter denied Jesus 3 times is the same place that Peter got thrown in prison for preaching that Jesus is Lord and Messiah. That's redemption. We also know that he got out of that prison because of an angel. So thanks be to God for that, right? And so with that, there's about 8 minutes left till 8 o'clock. We're going to end our online presentation. If you have any questions or any comments, or if I maybe messed up with my notes, let me know. And hope to see you maybe tomorrow at 10:30 at our church service. If not, hope you have a blessed day, and may the Lord bless you with this presentation, and as you learn more about biblical archaeology, and maybe your Bible can be opened and you have a new perspective on it, that would be a blessing to me with this teaching. So thank you so much, all of you online. I'm going to answer questions here in person